Hello everybody, my name is Hind Abdessalem. In the last video we talked about a definition of economic growth, example about economic growth, and then the difference between economic growth and economic development. So in this session we will complete chapter 1 and we will start by the determinants of economic development. For achieving economic development, we must know the determinants of economic development. The first determinant is human resources, and the second is natural resources. The third is capital formation, and the fourth is technology. So there are 4 determinants of economic development. Human resources such as labor supply, educational level, and then training. And the natural resources such as land, minerals, and environmental conditions. Capital formation such as machines, equipments, factories, and roads. The last one is technology, such as science, computer, and modern technology. So, the first important determinants of economic development is human resources. Human resources such labors needs natural resources to achieve economic development. So, number 1, human resources such labors need natural resources such land, mineral, and capital formation. Capital is very important for building factories and for buying machines and equipments. And fourth is technology. We can achieve growth without technology by traditional economy, but economic development need technology for achieving it. So without technology we can't achieve economic development. Then we talk about absolute poverty. Absolute poverty. There are a poverty line. A poverty line at $2 per day. If people live at less than $2 per day, so it's absolute poverty. And if people can live by $4 per day, so it's subsistence economy. Then it's the difference between absolute poverty and subsistence economy. Absolute poverty is being under the poverty line. So when we define absolute poverty, we call that a situation of being unable to meet the minimum levels of income, food, clothing, health care, shelter, and other essentials. So absolute poverty Peoples that unable to meet essential goods or minimum levels of income, food, clothing, healthcare. But subsistence economy, an economy in which production is mainly for personal consumption and the standard of living that yields more than the basic necessities of life. So, the difference between absolute poverty and subsistence economy, absolute poverty is below the poverty line. People's unable to meet minimum levels of essential necessities, such income, food, clothing, healthcare, and shelter. But subsistence economy, peoples have more than basic necessities of life. So, they over the poverty line. That's the difference between absolute poverty and subsistence economy. What is the meaning of basic necessities? Basic necessities of life is such as or including income, clothing, shelter, food, and health care. That's a basic necessities for life. Then we will talk about the nature of development economies. The nature of development economies. We will talk about 3 economies. Number 1, traditional economies. And number 2 is political economy. And number 3 is development economies or economics. So, when we talk about the nature of development economies, we must talk about 3 economies: traditional economics and political and development economies. What's the difference between these economics? Traditional economics means efficient use of resources or scarce resources, then increasing on production, and then increasing in GDP and GNI. So when we talk about traditional economies, we mean that efficient use of resources or scarce resources, then increasing in production and increasing in GDP and GNI. Political economy concerns with the relationship between politics and economics. So, political economy, the relationship between politics and economics. Development economics concerned with how economies are transformed from stagnation to growth, and from low income to high income. And number 3, overcome problems of absolute poverty. So, the nature of development economies. Number 1, traditional economies, which means efficient use of resources, then increasing in production and increasing in GDP and GNI. Political economy. It's a relationship between politics and economics. Development economics is how economics are transformed from 3 items: from stagnation to growth, from low income to high income. Number 3, overcome problems of absolute poverty. That's the nature of development economics. Now, we will talk about developing countries. Developing countries, we can define developing countries with countries which characterized by low levels of living and other development deficits. So, when we're talking about developing countries, we know that countries which are characterized by low levels of living and other development deficits, such as countries of Asia, Africa, Middle East, and Latin America. From our explanation for economic development, do you know the objectives of development? Objectives of development. Do you remember the definition of economic development? We talked that economic development concerns with increasing standard of living. So, one of the objectives of economic development is to raise levels of living. Number 2, we talk about subsistence goods for living, such as goods such as food, shelter, health, protection. So the objective of development is increasing the availability of basic life goods. The availability of basic life goods, such as food, clothing, shelter, income, and health care. That's essential goods that we talk about it. So, the objective of economic development, number 1, to raise levels of living or standard of living. Number 2, increasing the availability of basic life goods. Number 3, to expand the range of economic and social choices. So, increasing the range of economic and social choice. Now we will talk about the several reasons for paying attention to the problems of economic underdevelopment. Number 1, the evolution of the role of the United Nations. Number 1, the evolution of the role of the United Nations. After the Second World War, by by agreements and organizations it makes, such as WTO, World Trade Organizations, and IMF, International Monetary Fund, and agreements of GATS, so that the organizations is used for achieving development in developing countries. Number 2, the change in the attitude of the developed countries towards development in the developing countries. Number 3, increasing number of countries that gained independence. Number 4, increasing population in the world. Number 5, increasing government intervention in the economy. So there are 5 reasons for paying attention to the problems of economic underdevelopment. The first is the evolution of the role of the United Nations, and the second is the change of the attitude of developed countries towards development in developing countries. Number 3, increasing numbers of countries that gained independence, and number 4, increasing population in the world. Number 5, increasing government intervention in the economy. The vicious cycle of poverty, or the vicious cycle of backwardness. There are 3 factors. Number one is poverty, number 2 is ignorance, and number 3 is disease. That's a vicious cycle of poverty. So we will explain the vicious cycle of poverty. When production increasing, then your income will decrease, so decreasing in per capita income, and then decreasing in the expenditure on education, and then increasing in ignorance and disease. So again, when production decreases, there is a decrease in per capita income, and then decreasing in the expenditure on education, and then increasing in ignorance and disease. That's a vicious cycle of poverty. Vicious cycle of poverty is in developing countries. What's the opposite of poverty? The opposite of poverty is rich. And the opposite of ignorance is education. The opposite of disease is health. So this vicious cycle is in developed countries. developed countries. And this vicious cycle is in developing countries. So in developing countries, decreasing in production leads to decreasing in per capita income, and then increasing in poverty, ignorance, and disease. But in developed countries, increasing in production lead to increasing of per capita income, and then increasing the expenditure on education, then increasing of rich man's, increasing in education, increasing of health. So there's a difference between the vicious cycle in developing countries and developed countries. So that's the last part in chapter 1. Thanks for all of you.